Well, welcome back. February 13th, 2020. With impeachment and the Russia collusion investigation now fully over and done, I was starting to think about the public's attention and attention span or interest in what is now a full-fledged political season. It does seem, doesn't it, as if the Democratic campaign for 2020 started a lot longer than before Iowa, given what seemed like a full-time, full-court press to use every arrow in the party's quiver to unseat, remove from office Donald Trump. But now that we are in a legitimate campaign season, let's talk about it and what the American people will face this November. Ronald Reagan famously said on behalf of Barry Goldwater in 1964, "You and I are told we must choose between left or right, but I suggest there is no such thing as left or right. There is only up or down. Up to man's age-old dream, the maximum of individual freedom consistent with order, or down to the ant-heap of totalitarianism." Why do I put it that way? Why did he? I do so, the same reason he did then, because right now you have a party in the Republicans that has doubled the growth of the economy in the past 2 years, rescinded a 1938-style appeasement with the world's worst supporter of terrorism, reestablished the notion that our sovereignty matters, and put more money in your pockets, all while removing the IRS from your health care decisions. Along the way, it has reassured old allies of our commitment to them while at the same time curbing the missile threat from North Korea. It has removed from the face of the earth the world's two worst terrorists, and it has put 192 judges on the federal bench. But lest you think any of this is permanent, aside from the judges who serve for life, I think it's worth emphasizing because it is fully and completely reversible. You don't have to take my word for it. Listen to what the Democrats are saying. They say they are running for the presidency to reverse all of this. They want to reverse the tax cuts, the $2,000 average pay increase to the average American. In fact, they mock that amount as insignificant to most people. Tell me how many people you know who would say $2,000 is an insignificant amount. A gift, if you will. The problem is the way I just put it. It's not a gift. It's your money to begin with. The government just wanted to take it and more. And that it is true of every single Democrat running for president. They will take it back. Beyond this, they want to reinforce the mandate of Obamacare, putting the IRS back into the penalty business of your health care decisions after they made health care less available and more expensive to boot. If they don't take it fully over. They do not want to fund the protection of our southern border, even as they declaim against a major drug problem that's arisen in America, including a massive flow of drugs through our southern border. In fact, they tell you they want to abolish the very agency tasked with protecting our border as they dissent from physically protecting it. They do not now agree we should have rescinded a deal that pumped billions of dollars into the leading terrorist state into the world, a regime that, while also violent, represses women and homosexuals at home. They do want to deploy a Medicare for All scheme that will cost upwards of $32 trillion. $32 trillion, even as they say they want to reduce the deficit. Well, our entire national debt is $20 trillion. And again, they want to plan to spend 32 more. I'm not making this up. They promise the world, but they never really tell you the cost or how they'll pay for it. What else do they stand for? Not killing terrorists. Each and every one of them denounced and keeps denouncing the killing of Qasem Soleimani, even as protesters in the streets of Iran showed gratitude for that. They said not a word, however, about Soleimani's regime killing 1,500 of its own people simply for protesting the priorities of the regime only 3 months ago. What else do you not hear them speak about? You don't hear them speak about the president's Israel-Palestinian peace plan, because on the one hand, the Democrats cannot afford to offend their now fully anti-Zionist base, but on the other, they know they cannot afford to offend sympathizers to Israel. They know something else, too. They know that it is very hard to accomplish a peace process between a democratic government and two other governments, neither democratic, at war with themselves, which is the dirty little fact of Palestinian governments right now. There are two major territories they claim, one run by the Islamist and Iran-financed Hamas, and the other run by the legatees of Yasser Arafat under the banner of Fatah, neither of which tolerate civil liberties, and both at on and off war against each other. What else do you not hear about? You don't hear something curiously absent from the Democratic base: who their ideal Supreme Court nominees would be. You don't hear, in other words, what some of the early candidates like Kristen Gillibrand talked about, which was, in her words, a woman's fundamental right to choose. Why not? Because that conversation leads one to an extremism that is in fact represented by the Democratic governor of Virginia, which no Democrat will denounce, that to support Roe versus Wade today means ultimately to supporting effective postpartum abortions. And by the way, not too much attention should be put on the governor of Virginia anyway because, well, he has a blackface and Klan problem. What else do you not hear about? You almost never hear the word or words Constitution mentioned in the Democratic Party debates. It's curious, isn't it? Time was you used to hear it from them all the time, but I think I know why you don't hear Democrats talk about the Constitution much anymore, except in vague terms of Donald Trump being a threat to it. It's hard to find provisions of it that Democrats actually still support. Separation of powers gone. Do they still support the First Amendment, or do they more so support efforts to curtail conservative speech? Do they still support the First Amendment, or do they more so believe social media should be in the censorship business? Do they support the Second Amendment? To ask that question is to answer it. Heck, opposing it is the major calling card of the wealthiest Democrat in the race. How about the Fourth and Fifth Amendments? Time was, in the 1980s and 1990s, you heard a lot about alleged criminal defendant rights. Today, it's quite the opposite. They go after the Attorney General for his reinstallation of criminals' rights, or at least alleged criminals' rights. In other words, though we try to explain how leftward the Democratic Party has become, you don't hear their candidates or supporters putting much in for a defense of what used to just be known as general liberalism. Time was, this is what they did almost by rote, defending liberalism. I was thinking of the 1988 campaign between Michael Dukakis and George H.W. Bush. Bush painted Dukakis as a liberal. Dukakis and his supporters defended the word and wore it as a badge. It put me in mind of an op-ed, then famous, by the conductor Leonard Bernstein in the New York Times in the midst of that 1988 race. He didn't think Dukakis was defending the word liberal well enough. He wrote the following, quote, "From this word liberal, we derive the word liberty, which is what the civilized world has been struggling for throughout its history, whether through reform or revolution, including our own American Revolution. George Washington was a revolutionary, as were Jefferson and Franklin. They and the other founders strove for liberty above all. All these forefathers were therefore liberals," close quote. Let me pause on that for a moment because it's an interesting syllogism. Interesting because you will never hear a Democrat today invoke the founders or mention George Washington or Thomas Jefferson fondly, unless they're quoting them in order to impeach or defend impeaching the president. Most of the time, they are denigrating the founders, not even allowing that they were our founders, pointing out that the real founding, at least to the New York Times, which ran that Bernstein op-ed after all, was about 160 years before we all thought it was, because slavery. But nevertheless, Bernstein went on to write the following, and this is important, quote, "Who fought to free the slaves? Liberals. Who succeeded in abolishing the poll tax? Liberals. Who fought for women's rights, civil rights, free public education? Liberals. Who stood guard and still stands guard against sweatshops, child labor, racism, bigotry? Lovers of freedom and enemies of tyranny do, also known as liberals." Close quote. You know what's so interesting about that? Democrats don't speak up to defend a liberalism because that is or was liberalism, and they simply don't believe it anymore. They do not believe America fought to free slaves. They don't believe America succeeded in abolishing racist, anti-voting procedures. They do not believe women have achieved rights here or that civil rights are worth either extant or continued defense. They do not believe we have overcome sweatshops, racism, and bigotry. Isn't it interesting, though? In the 1980s, those things were assumed as won, as victories, as the norm. And even after 2 terms, of 2 Democratic presidents since then, they just don't think they exist at all. And one thing they certainly will not talk about, defeating tyranny. Kind of interesting, no? That's how far the left has moved, to the point where they can't defend liberalism because they simply don't believe in its tenets. I say be afraid, be very afraid. I'm Seth Leibsohn, 602-508-0960. We'll be right back. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about my friends at Guns Etc. They are true American patriots. They strongly support our president, and they have over 10,200 square feet of firearms and firearm accessories. Please take my advice and stop by their store, which is a symbol of American freedom, or visit them at gunsetcetera.com and have access to over $350 million in firearms merchandise.